My husband's father died unexpectedly, making him CO overnight. By morning my access card was deactivated. He smirked. You're done here. I whispered, perfect. Moments later his father's lawyer arrived with a will. Turns out he secretly left me 65% of the company. I now own his empire, and his penthouse mistress's lease. You're done here. The words hit me like a physical blow. Standing across from Christian in his newly claimed office, I watched his lips curl into that familiar smirk, the one that had always revealed his true feelings during our 12 years of marriage. The man I'd built a life with was erasing me from the company in less than 24 hours after his father's death. But he didn't know what I knew. He couldn't possibly imagine what was coming. But I'm getting ahead of myself. To understand how I ended up here, we need to go back to where it all began. My father, Shane Miller, collapsed in the break room of Owen Montgomery's investment firm on a crisp October morning. By the time the ambulance arrived, he was already gone. A massive aneurysm that no one could have predicted. I was 24, working as a junior financial analyst at a competing firm, and suddenly completely alone in the world. At the funeral, Owen approached me with genuine grief etched into his weathered face. He and my father had been friends for 30 years, starting as mailroom clerks and rising through different companies. Victoria, Owen said, placing his hand on my shoulder, your father was the closest thing I had to a brother. Before he died, I promised him I'd make sure you were taken care of. I was touched but waved off his concern. I appreciate that, Mr. Montgomery, but I'm doing fine on my own. Owen's eyes held something I couldn't quite read. Please call me Owen. And I insist we have dinner next week. There's something I'd like to discuss with you. That dinner changed everything. Owen introduced me to his son, Christian. Tall, conventionally handsome with his father's piercing blue eyes but none of his warmth. Christian was polite but distant, clearly there under duress. I later learned that Owen had orchestrated the meeting with surgical precision, believing that uniting our families would fulfill his promise to my father in the most complete way possible. 3 months later I found myself engaged to Christian Montgomery. The proposal wasn't romantic. It happened over dessert at a restaurant I couldn't afford on my salary, with Owen beaming proudly while Christian slid a ring across the table with all the enthusiasm of someone passing the salt. This makes sense, Christian had said, not meeting my eyes. Father thinks we're a good match professionally. I accepted because, despite the arrangement's coldness, I saw an opportunity. Christian was next in line to take over Montgomery Financial, and Owen had hinted that there would be a place for me in the company. It wasn't love, but it was a partnership that could work. The wedding was lavish, designed to impress the New York financial elite rather than celebrate our union. I wore a designer gown that Audrey, Christian's mother, had selected without my input. She'd looked me up and down in the boutique and said, "We'll need to make you look like you belong," her smile never reaching her eyes. Our first dinner as a married couple in the Montgomery mansion revealed the battlefield I'd entered. The dining room was oppressively formal, with oil paintings of stern-faced Montgomery ancestors watching our every move. Victoria, Audrey said, examining the way I held my fork, Christian tells me your father was in finance. Small firm, wasn't it? Miller Investments wasn't large, I replied, but my father built it from nothing. Owen jumped in. Shane had an incredible mind for risk assessment. That's where Victoria gets her analytical skills. Audrey's smile tightened. How fortunate. Though I've always believed some things can't be learned, only inherited. Christian remained silent, swirling his wine, his expression unreadable. Later that night he slept as far from me as the king-sized bed would allow. Our first year of marriage established the pattern. Christian would be charming at corporate events, his hand possessively at the small of my back, then completely withdraw once we were home. Some weeks he'd make an effort, bringing home flowers asking about my day. Other weeks he'd barely acknowledge my existence. 6 months into our marriage, Owen invited me to his office. "I'd like you to join the company," he said, sliding a folder across his mahogany desk. "We need someone with your skills in our risk assessment department." The offer was generous, and I accepted immediately, hungry for purpose beyond being Christian's wife. Christian was furious when he found out. "Father didn't even discuss this with me," he seethed that night. "You're my wife, not a Montgomery Financial employee." "I have an MBA from Columbia," I reminded him. "I'm qualified for this position." "That's not the point," he snapped. The point is knowing your place. Despite Christian's objections, I excelled in my new role. Owen became a mentor, stopping by my office to discuss market trends or offer guidance on presentations. He saw something in me that his own son couldn't, or wouldn't, acknowledge. Audrey, meanwhile, made her disapproval known in 1,000 subtle ways. At company functions, she'd introduce me as Christian's wife, rather than by name or title. She'd reminisce about families that had been in finance for generations, pointedly excluding mine from that elite group. "You'll learn our ways eventually," she told me at the company Christmas party, 6 months after I started. "Some people just take longer to polish." Owen witnessed this interaction and later apologized for his wife's behavior. "Audrey comes from old money," he explained. "She forgets that the most valuable perspectives often come from different backgrounds." As my first anniversary with Christian approached, I realized the truth of my situation. I had married into a dynasty without being accepted by it. Christian tolerated me, Audrey undermined me, and only Owen seemed to believe in my potential. So I persisted. Each morning I arrived at the office early, determined to prove my worth. Each evening I returned to a marriage that existed mainly for appearances. And gradually I began to understand that Owen's promise to my father had created something neither of them could have anticipated. A business arrangement disguised as a marriage, but one that was giving me access to a world I might reshape from within. What I didn't know then was how completely that world would one day become mine, or what price I would pay before claiming it. My path within Montgomery Financial wasn't paved with gold. It was lined with whispers. I could feel the eyes tracking my movements as I walked to my desk each morning, calculating whether I belonged or was merely the product of nepotism. The risk assessment department was almost exclusively male, a sea of near-identical navy suits and raised eyebrows whenever I spoke in meetings. "Mrs. Montgomery, that's an interesting perspective," George Harlow, the department head, would say after my presentations, the slight pause conveying volumes. "But I wonder if you've considered the traditional approach?" Traditional. The word followed me like a shadow, a constant reminder that I was the outlier. I began arriving at 6:30 a.m., a full hour before anyone else, reviewing reports and preparing counterarguments to the inevitable pushback. I stayed until the cleaning staff arrived, meticulously building cases that couldn't be dismissed with a condescending smile. My breakthrough came 3 months in when I identified a dangerous exposure in one of our mid-sized investment portfolios that everyone else had overlooked. The client, a regional manufacturing firm, had been quietly acquiring companies with significant environmental liabilities. If any of these waste disposal issues trigger EPA action, they could face millions in cleanup costs, I explained to Harlow, sliding my detailed analysis across his desk. He skimmed my report, his expression shifting from skepticism to grudging respect. "I'll bring this to the risk committee," he said finally. When my assessment saved the firm from a potential $12 million loss, the whispers changed tone. I was no longer just Christian's wife to my colleagues. I was Victoria, the analyst with the eye for hidden risk. Home life evolved in parallel with my professional growth. 14 months into our marriage, I discovered I was pregnant. Christian's reaction was surprisingly positive, as if a child represented something concrete and expected. A box checked on his life plan. For the first time, he seemed to look at me with genuine interest rather than obligation. Brooklyn arrived during a blizzard that paralyzed Manhattan. 7 pounds of fierce determination with her father's blue eyes and my dark hair. Christian held her with unexpected tenderness, something shifting in his expression as he counted her tiny fingers. "She's perfect," he whispered, and for a moment, I glimpsed the man he could have been had he not been raised on ambition and appearances. Our home life settled into something resembling normalcy. Christian began returning from work earlier, asking about Brooklyn's milestones, initiating conversations over dinner. When I returned to work after 4 months of maternity leave, Owen arranged a flexible schedule that allowed me to continue nursing. "Family and career aren't mutually exclusive," Owen told me, waving away my thanks. "The company benefits from your perspective. We can certainly accommodate your needs as a mother." 2 years later, Connor joined our family, a quieter presence than his sister, observant and thoughtful even as an infant. With 2 children under 3, Christian and I reached an unspoken truce. We functioned as partners in the complex logistics of raising a family while maintaining careers, finding common ground in our children even as other aspects of our marriage remained performative. At the office, I had graduated from analyst to senior risk manager, with my own small team and direct reporting line to Owen. Our twice-weekly strategy meetings became a fixture in both our schedules, sessions where we'd dissect market trends and institutional vulnerabilities with a shared language that developed over time. Victoria sees patterns that others miss, Owen commented during a quarterly leadership meeting, causing Christian's jaw to tighten visibly from across the conference table. That evening, Christian's mood was ice-cold as he picked at his dinner. "You and my father seem very aligned these days," he said, the words dipped in acid. "We work well together," I replied carefully. "He values thorough analysis. And I don't," Christian challenged, eyes narrowing. "I didn't say that. You didn't have to." He pushed away from the table, leaving his meal half-eaten. Christian's jealousy manifested in small acts of undermining, questions raised about my department's budget, suggestions that my reports were overly cautious, sudden scheduling conflicts that prevented me from attending key meetings. I countered by documenting everything, building alliances with other department heads, and ensuring my work was unassailable. Family gatherings became another battleground, with Audrey serving as Christian's unwitting ally. At Connor's christening reception, she cornered me in the kitchen while I was preparing his bottle. "2 children already," she remarked, eyeing me over her champagne flute. "I suppose motherhood gives you something to fall back on when work becomes too challenging." "I find that motherhood has sharpened my focus actually," I replied, maintaining eye contact. "Nothing clarifies priorities like being responsible for someone else's future." My calm response seemed to frustrate her more than anger would have. Over time, I developed a strategy for Audrey's barbs, acknowledging them with grace while subtly redirecting the conversation. The approach disarmed her without creating scenes at family functions, allowing me to maintain dignity while refusing to be diminished. The real turning point in my career came during what later became known as Black Thursday within the company. A major trading platform crashed during peak hours, locking our traders out of positions worth billions while the market plummeted. The risk management team was summoned to the crisis room, where panic and raised voices created a chaotic atmosphere. I noticed that no one was coordinating the response teams, with different departments working at cross purposes. While others argued about blame, I grabbed a whiteboard marker and began mapping out a structured response plan, categorizing exposures, prioritizing the most volatile positions, and assigning specific responsibilities. "Everyone stop," I called out, my voice cutting through the noise. "We need structure to minimize damage." The room fell silent as I outlined my approach. Owen, who had been observing from the doorway, stepped forward and simply said, "Listen to Victoria." For the next 6 hours, I directed the emergency response, making split-second decisions that prevented catastrophic losses. By market close, we had contained the damage to manageable levels. Later that evening, Owen found me in my office, still reconciling the final numbers. "You have a gift for crisis management," he said quietly. "You stay clear-headed when everyone else loses perspective." "I just saw what needed to be done," I replied, exhaustion making me honest. "That's exactly the point," Owen said. "And it's exactly what this company will need in the future." I didn't understand then what he meant, or how he was already planning for a future where leadership would pass not to his son, but to the woman who had entered his family as an arrangement and proven herself indispensable. Owen's recognition of my abilities marked a subtle shift in the company's power dynamics. However, the fragile peace at home was about to be tested again. 3 years after Connor's birth, I found myself pregnant once more. Unexpectedly, during a rare period when Christian and I had briefly reconnected following a successful joint presentation to the board. The news of a third child received a markedly different reaction than the first 2. Christian stared at the pregnancy test in my hand with something approaching alarm. "Another one?" "We agreed 2 was practical," he said, running his hand through his perfectly styled hair. "Life doesn't always follow the business plan," I replied, already cradling my still flat stomach protectively. The pregnancy with Zoe was difficult from the start. Severe morning sickness kept me home for weeks, forcing me to manage my team remotely while battling constant nausea. Christian's visits to my bedside grew increasingly perfunctory, quick check-ins before he headed out for client dinners, that seemed to multiply as my pregnancy progressed. Zoe arrived 6 weeks early, tiny but fiercely determined. While Brooklyn and Connor had Christian's blue eyes, Zoe had my hazel ones, giving her a direct, unsettling gaze that seemed to see right through people even as a newborn. She fought her way through 2 weeks in the NICU, with me sleeping in a chair beside her incubator while Christian maintained his usual work schedule. "She's a fighter," the nurse commented, watching Zoe grip my finger with surprising strength. "Just like her mama." The day I brought Zoe home, something crystallized within me, a cool, clear understanding that had been forming for years. My marriage to Christian wasn't a partnership. It wasn't even a functional relationship. It was a business arrangement, a merger of convenience that had produced 3 beautiful children but little genuine connection. I watched Christian hold our newborn daughter, his expression distant as if already calculating when he could reasonably return to his evening engagements, and felt a strange sense of freedom in finally acknowledging the truth. I no longer expected love from him, which meant I no longer had to pretend to offer it in return. "I'm returning to work next month," I informed him over breakfast a few weeks later, Zoe sleeping peacefully against my shoulder. Christian lowered his newspaper. "That seems rushed." "I've arranged excellent childcare for all 3 children," I replied evenly. "There's an executive position opening in risk management, and Owen suggested I apply." The newspaper crinkled as Christian's grip tightened. "An executive position? That's director level." "Yes, it is." "You're barely 35. I'm 34 and more than qualified." The tension between us crystallized into something harder, more defined. Christian said nothing further, but the next day I discovered he had scheduled a closed-door lunch with the board's most conservative member, Herbert Landon, a man who still referred to female employees as gals regardless of their position. 2 could play at that game. I arranged my own meetings with key board members, bringing detailed proposals for expanding our risk assessment protocols into emerging markets. By the time the promotion decision came before the board, I had secured enough support that even Christian's behind-the-scenes maneuvering couldn't block the appointment. The day I moved into my executive office with its coveted corner view of Manhattan, Owen stopped by with a small wrapped package. "This was your father's," he said as I unwrapped an elegant vintage fountain pen. "Shane would have been proud to see you here." I blinked back unexpected tears. "Thank you for believing in me when others didn't." "Your value to this company has nothing to do with your last name," Owen replied simply. As my professional star rose, Christian grew increasingly distant. He began traveling more frequently, quick trips to Boston, Chicago, Los Angeles, always with plausible business justifications but vague on specific details. The first concrete evidence arrived innocuously, a receipt that fell from his suit jacket while the housekeeper was preparing it for dry cleaning. A jewelry purchase from Tiffany that had never made its way to my jewelry box or the children's keepsake collections. When questioned, Christian dismissed it as a gift for his executive assistant's 10-year work anniversary, plausible enough that I chose not to press, though the seed of doubt had been planted. More breadcrumbs followed. A restaurant charge in Midtown on an evening he'd claimed to be working late at the office. A text notification that flashed on his phone from someone named Jay, with a message too intimate for a business contact. Small inconsistencies accumulated like snowflakes, not enough to confront him with but sufficient to create a cold certainty in my stomach. Meanwhile, Owen's once robust presence began showing signs of strain. The man who had bounded upstairs rather than waiting for elevators now moved with careful deliberation. Board meetings that he once dominated for hours saw him calling for short breaks. When I brought files to his office late one afternoon, I caught him dry swallowing pills he quickly swept into a drawer upon seeing me. "Just vitamins," he claimed with a dismissive wave, but the lie hung between us, acknowledged but unchallenged. 3 weeks later, Owen asked me to stay after a leadership meeting, waiting until everyone else had filed out before closing the door. "Victoria, I need to tell you something in confidence," he began, settling heavily into his chair. "I've been diagnosed with a heart condition. Nothing immediate, but concerning enough that I need to consider the company's future leadership more urgently than I'd planned." My throat tightened. "What can I do?" "For now, just be ready. I've watched you grow into an exceptional executive, someone who understands both the numbers and the people who generate them. Christian has many qualities, but he lacks your judgment, your ability to see the whole chessboard." His words hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. Before I could formulate a response, Owen's assistant buzzed to remind him of another appointment, and the moment passed. Over the next few months, these private conversations continued. Discussions of long-term strategy, introductions to Owen's most trusted external advisors, detailed reviews of aspects of the business that fell outside my direct responsibilities. Though never explicitly stated, it became clear that Owen was grooming me for something more significant than my current role. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place on a rainy Tuesday in April. Working late, I needed Owen's signature on time-sensitive documents but found his office empty. His executive assistant mentioned he'd gone to check on a property investment, a company-owned residence used for visiting executives. The penthouse on Park Avenue? I asked, recalling the luxury apartment mentioned in corporate housing reports. That's the one, she confirmed, giving me the address. He keeps a key in his desk if it's urgent. The building was everything you'd expect. Discreet doorman, private elevator, the kind of hushed elegance that whispers of old money. Using Owen's key, I prepared to leave the documents with a note when I heard a shower running somewhere in the apartment. Thinking Owen had returned and not heard my entry, I called out, moving toward the sound. What I found instead stopped me cold. A nightstand covered with framed photos of Christian with a woman I'd never seen before. In one image, they stood on a beach, his arm wrapped possessively around her waist. In another, they gazed at each other across a candlelit dinner table. The shower shut off. Frozen in shock, I barely registered the bathroom door opening until a female voice called out, "Christian? Is that you early?" I slipped out before she could discover me, the documents forgotten, my world tilting on its axis. The carefully constructed facade of my marriage had just crumbled completely, revealing a betrayal more comprehensive than I'd imagined. My husband hadn't been having occasional indiscretions, he'd been maintaining a parallel relationship, complete with a luxury home furnished by his father's company. What I couldn't understand was Owen's role in all this. Had he known? Facilitated it? Or was this discovery precisely why he'd been preparing me for something more? I spent the night after discovering the penthouse in a daze, mechanically preparing dinner for the children while my mind replayed every moment of my discovery. When Christian called to say he'd be working late, again, the lie settled between us through the phone line, heavy and toxic. I almost confronted him then but held back, needing time to process what I'd seen and formulate a strategic response rather than an emotional one. The next morning I faced a dilemma: confront Owen about his knowledge of the arrangement or wait for the right moment. The decision was made for me when I arrived at the office to find the executive floor in unusual disarray. Owen had requested an emergency board meeting at 9 a.m., and department heads were scrambling to prepare updates. The boardroom filled quickly, tension evident in the rigid postures and hushed conversations. Owen arrived last, his complexion ashen but his demeanor composed as always. Christian sat on his right, scrolling through his phone with affected nonchalance. "Thank you all for accommodating this last-minute meeting," Owen began, his voice steady but lacking its usual resonance. "I've received some concerning reports about our exposure in the Asian markets that require immediate—" His words cut off abruptly. The Mont Blanc pen he'd been holding clattered onto the polished mahogany table. His right hand clutched at his chest, his eyes widening in surprise more than pain. "Dad." Christian's voice cut through the sudden silence. Owen tried to stand, then collapsed back into his chair, his breath coming in labored gasps. I was moving before anyone else reacted, phone already in hand, dialing emergency services while checking his pulse with my free hand. "His heart rate is erratic," I told the 911 operator, keeping my voice controlled despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "We need an ambulance at Montgomery Financial, 53rd floor." The next 17 minutes unfolded in horrifying slow motion. The boardroom cleared except for Christian, myself, and Margaret from HR, who had emergency medical training. We moved Owen to the floor, loosened his tie, monitored his increasingly irregular pulse. When his breathing stopped completely, Margaret began chest compressions while I counted the rhythm aloud, my voice echoing unnaturally in the cavernous room. The paramedics arrived with efficient urgency, taking over CPR and connecting Owen to portable monitors that displayed alarming patterns of spikes and flatlines. They worked with practiced coordination, administering medications, applying defibrillator pads, calling out medical terminology that transformed Owen from the man I knew into a clinical emergency. Despite their efforts, Owen Montgomery was pronounced dead at 9:37 a.m., the cause listed as massive cardiac arrest. The man who had been a father figure to me for over a decade was gone, taking with him whatever plans he had been formulating for the company's future, and for my role in it. The immediate aftermath passed in a blur of notifications and arrangements. Christian, to my surprise, appeared genuinely devastated, his normal polished facade cracking to reveal raw grief. For one brief moment, standing beside Audrey as she received condolences in the company atrium, we were united by shared loss rather than divided by years of resentment. That unity lasted precisely 18 hours. The morning after Owen's death, Christian arrived at the office uncharacteristically early. By 7:30 a.m. he had convened an emergency session with the board's executive committee. By 8:15 a.m. he had been named interim CEO. By 9 a.m., security personnel were implementing new access protocols throughout the building. I discovered this last development when my elevator access to the executive floor was denied, my badge flashing a red error message instead of the usual green confirmation. Redirected to security, I was informed that organizational changes had been implemented overnight. "I need to speak with Christian," I insisted, already sensing what was happening. The security guard, someone I'd greeted every morning for years, couldn't meet my eyes. "Mr. Montgomery left instructions that you're to be escorted to clear out your office. Your access has been restricted to the 38th floor only, and only for today." The humiliation of being escorted through the executive suite like a potential thief burned through my shock. Colleagues averted their gazes as I was marched past, a security guard positioned at my office door while I mechanically packed personal items into a cardboard box. "Your company devices need to remain here," the guard informed me, gesturing to my laptop and tablet. "And I'll need your badge before you leave." Fury cleared the fog of grief. I straightened my spine, channeled every ounce of dignity I could muster, and placed my badge on the desk with deliberate care. "I'd like to speak with my husband before I leave," I said, the word husband tasting bitter on my tongue. 20 minutes later I stood in Owen's former office, now Christian's, taking in the changes already implemented. Owen's collection of vintage nautical maps had been replaced with Christian's modern art pieces. The comfortable leather chairs where I'd sat for countless conversations with Owen had disappeared, replaced by sleek chrome and glass furniture that prioritized aesthetics over comfort. Behind Owen's, Christian's, desk, my husband leaned back in his chair, the morning light catching the gold of his watch as he gestured dismissively toward a visitor's chair. "I assumed you'd want to pay your respects," he said, his expression a practiced mask of professional regret. "But honestly, Victoria, it's better this way. Cleaner." "Cleaner than what, exactly?" I asked, remaining standing. "Then pretending this arrangement needs to continue." He straightened a pen on his desk. "Father's gone. There's no need to maintain appearances. So firing me is about our marriage, not my performance?" A flash of annoyance crossed his face. "Your position was created by my father. The board agrees we need to restructure now." "The board met less than 24 hours after your father died to discuss restructuring?" "Some decisions can't wait for sentiment," he replied coldly. "The company needs decisive leadership now." "Like the decisive leadership that maintains a mistress in a company-owned penthouse?" I asked quietly. Christian's composure slipped for just a moment, genuine surprise flashing across his face before he recovered. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I think you do. Just like I think you've been waiting for this moment, to take control and erase anyone who challenges your authority, starting with your wife." His lips curled into that familiar smirk, the one that had always revealed his true nature. "You're done here," he said with finality. I leaned forward slightly, hands on his desk. "Perfect," I whispered. The word hung between us, my calm acceptance clearly not the reaction he'd expected. Before he could respond, his assistant's voice came through the intercom. "Mr. Montgomery, Mr. Walter Phillips is here. He says it's regarding your father's will and cannot wait." Christian frowned, pressing the intercom button. "Send him in." The door opened to reveal a man in his 70s, silver-haired and carrying a worn leather briefcase. Walter Phillips had been Owen's personal attorney for over 30 years, handling matters too delicate or personal for the company's legal department. "Mrs. Montgomery," he nodded to me with formal courtesy. "I'm glad you're here as well." It saves me having to locate you separately. Christian's expression darkened. My wife was just leaving. Actually, Walter replied, setting his briefcase on the desk with deliberate care. Given the contents of your father's will, I believe Mrs. Montgomery should remain for this discussion. What I'm about to share will be relevant to both of you. Walter Phillips settled into the chair across from Christian, adjusting his glasses before opening his briefcase. I remained standing, frozen between my instinct to leave and my curiosity about what could possibly be relevant to me after being so thoroughly dismissed. Prior to his passing, Owen made some significant changes to his will and the corporate structure. Walter began removing a sealed envelope and several bound documents. He was very specific about the timing of this revelation. Christian leaned forward, impatience etched in every line of his face. I'm aware my father updated his will last year. The board has already confirmed my position as CEO. On an interim basis only, Walter corrected mildly. The board cannot make permanent appointments regarding leadership or asset distribution until the terms of your father's will are executed. He carefully broke the seal on the envelope. This should clarify matters considerably. What followed was the most extraordinary 15 minutes of my life. Walter's measured voice delivered Owen's final message, a detailed explanation of how he had restructured the company's ownership over the previous 5 years, gradually transferring shares into a complex arrangement of trusts and holding companies. The summary is this, Walter said, looking directly at me rather than Christian. Owen Montgomery has left 65% controlling interest in Montgomery Financial to Victoria Shane Miller Montgomery. The silence that followed was absolute. Christian's face drained of color, then flushed crimson. That's impossible, he finally sputtered. There must be some mistake. There is no mistake, Walter replied, sliding a document toward Christian. Your father was methodical in his planning. He left detailed explanations for his decisions. My mind raced to process what I was hearing. 65%. Controlling interest. The empire that Christian had assumed would be his was now mine. Why? I asked softly, finding my voice at last. Walter removed a handwritten letter from his files. Owen asked me to give you this privately, but given the circumstances, perhaps it's best read now. The letter, written in Owen's distinctive, slanting script, laid bare his reasoning. He had watched me grow from an arranged marriage pawn into a capable executive. He had seen Christian's lack of judgment in both business and personal matters. Most surprisingly, he had known about the penthouse arrangement for years, not because he condoned it, but because he recognized it as evidence of his son's character flaws. I promised your father I would take care of you, Owen had written. This is how I fulfill that promise, by entrusting you with what I built, knowing you'll protect it not just for yourself but for Brooklyn, Connor, and Zoe. Christian will receive 20% ownership, enough to maintain his lifestyle but not enough to control the company's direction. This isn't punishment, it's protection for everyone involved, including him. Christian's fury erupted as I finished reading. This is absurd. I am his son. I've worked at this company my entire career. As has Victoria, Walter pointed out calmly. Owen made his decision with full mental capacity and thorough legal consultation. The documents are ironclad. I'll challenge it, Christian threatened, pounding his fist on the desk. No judge will uphold this betrayal. You're welcome to try, Walter replied, unfazed. However, Owen anticipated that reaction. He withdrew another document. This contains evidence regarding the penthouse apartment, the offshore accounts you've been maintaining, and several questionable client transactions over the past 3 years. Christian went still, his expression confirming every implication. Owen didn't include this information in the will, Walter continued. He hoped it wouldn't be necessary. But he was prepared for all contingencies. I found my voice again. I think I need some time to process this. Of course, Walter nodded. However, there is the matter of the board meeting scheduled for tomorrow morning. As majority shareholder, your presence will be required to ratify leadership positions. The next 24 hours passed in a surreal blur. I returned home to find Christian had cleared out his essential belongings, leaving only a terse message that he was staying elsewhere. I spent the evening with my children, maintaining normalcy while my internal landscape shifted tectonically. By morning I had made my first decision as controlling owner of Montgomery Financial. I would honor Owen's faith in me. The board meeting was a study in power dynamics. Several members who had readily accepted Christian's ascension now scrambled to align themselves with me. Others remained skeptical, their expressions carefully neutral as Walter outlined the ownership changes. While this transition is unexpected, I addressed the room after the legal explanations concluded, it doesn't change our fundamental mission. Montgomery Financial will continue to prioritize sound investment strategies and ethical business practices. And the leadership structure? Herbert Landon asked, eyeing me doubtfully. I'll be assuming the role of CO, I stated simply. My first priority will be stabilizing our client relationships during this transition. By day's end, my access card had been reactivated with the highest security clearance. My personal items were returned to a new office, Owen's former space, which I'd insisted remain largely unchanged as a reminder of his vision. The security guard who had escorted me out now nodded respectfully as I passed. The most difficult task remained. 3 days after Owen's funeral, I used my newfound authority to access the penthouse apartment. This time I didn't slip away when I heard movement. Instead, I waited in the living room until a woman emerged from the bedroom. Tall, elegant, perhaps mid-30s. Her shock at finding me there quickly transformed into wary resignation. "You must be Victoria," she said, her voice surprisingly gentle. "I've seen pictures of you with the children." "And you are?" I asked, maintaining my composure. "Jacqueline Davis. Everyone calls me Jackie." She gestured helplessly. I suppose this was inevitable. What I had expected to be a confrontation evolved into something far more complex. Jackie, it turned out, had been told a carefully constructed narrative by Christian, that our marriage was in name only, maintained for the children and his father's approval, while their relationship was the real one. "He promised we'd be together officially after Owen passed," she explained, twisting her hands in her lap. "I never wanted to hurt anyone. I thought everyone understood the arrangement." "Clearly not everyone did," I replied. Over the next hour, Jackie revealed details that completed the puzzle of Christian's deception. The promises made to her, financial arrangements, even discussions about how the children would eventually be integrated into their life together. It became clear she had been manipulated as thoroughly as I had, though in different ways. "What happens now?" she asked finally. "I assume you'll want me gone." I considered her question carefully. "Actually, I may have a proposition for you." The restructuring of Montgomery Financial began the following week. With Jackie's insider knowledge of Christian's hidden dealings and my understanding of the company's operations, we methodically untangled years of questionable arrangements. Jackie's background in compliance at a competing firm, the real reason Christian had targeted her initially, proved invaluable as we implemented new oversight protocols. Christian's attempts to challenge the will faltered quickly when faced with the evidence Owen had compiled. Instead, he negotiated for a generous settlement in exchange for his 20% ownership stake, effectively removing himself from the company entirely. On the 1-month anniversary of taking control, I invited my children into my office after hours. Brooklyn, now 9, examined the space with curious eyes. Connor, 7, quietly investigated the model ships Owen had collected. 5-year-old Zoe climbed directly into my lap at the massive desk. "This was Grandpa Owen's office," I explained. "Now it's mine, and someday it might belong to one of you." "Dad says we're not going to live together anymore," Brooklyn stated matter-of-factly. "He says you took his company." I turned my chair to face the Manhattan skyline, gathering my children close. "This company was built to last generations," I told them. "Grandpa Owen trusted me to protect it for your future. Your dad and I have different ideas about how to do that, so yes, we'll be living separately. But you'll always have both of us, and you'll always have a place here." As the city lights began twinkling in the gathering dusk, I felt Owen's presence in the room, not as a ghost, but as a legacy now entrusted to my hands. The empire he had built would continue, transformed by my vision but honoring his foundation. And the woman he had brought into his family through an arrangement of convenience had found something he likely never anticipated. Not just security or success, but genuine purpose.